You're not just watching a story, you're stepping into a moment that lives in the silence between two people who should have never fallen in love but did. He was her son's best friend, young, bold, unafraid to see what others ignored. And she had been invisible for far too long, but he noticed the quiet ache in her laughter, the softness behind her strength, the woman hidden beneath years of being needed but never wanted. What started with a glance became a touch. And what followed wasn't wild or reckless, it was reverent, sacred, slow. This isn't just about desire, it's about being truly seen, maybe for the first time. If you've ever wanted to believe love can find you when you least expect it, you're in the right place. So sit back, breathe in, and subscribe now, because here we tell stories that touch more than just skin, they reach the soul. It began quietly, like most things that matter. There was nothing dramatic in the beginning, just a slow, steady noticing. He was always around, laughing with my son, tossing a football across the yard, raiding the fridge like it belonged to him. Just another familiar voice in the background of a house that had grown used to echoes. But then, slowly, the noise faded and the noticing began. He saw things no one else did, not the big, loud parts of me, the ones worn like a mask for family dinners or neighborhood hellos. He noticed the spaces in between, the quiet pauses when conversation drifted off, the way I lingered by the window, staring at something far beyond the glass, the way my hands moved when I poured tea, slow and tired, like I was always searching for something warm to hold that wouldn't cool so quickly. Most people saw the surface. They saw what they expected to see, a caretaker, a background character, a name they knew but never really thought about. But he looked differently, like he was studying, like he was listening to something silent. There was a day, one I remember more by how it felt than what happened. I was in the kitchen, absent, mindedly stirring a pot I didn't want to eat from. He walked in, his steps light, easy, like they always were. But his voice was lower that day, not playful, not loud. He asked if I was okay, just that, soft and steady, like he meant it. I didn't answer, not really, just smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. He didn't push, just stayed close, leaning against the counter, watching me with a quiet intensity that unnerved and soothed at the same time. His presence filled the room in a way that made me forget how lonely the walls had become. It wasn't flirting, it wasn't games, it was something else, something warmer, deeper. It was the way his gaze never wandered, like he wasn't afraid to look directly into the truth of me, and the way he did that. Like he was willing to carry whatever he found there. I started to feel it before I wanted to admit it, how I would breathe a little slower when he was near, how my hands would feel alive again when he brushed past me, how I began to count his visits not by time, but by how long he stayed in the room after everyone else had left. He never rushed to leave, he stayed, he lingered. That meant more than anything. Others talked to me like they were checking off a list. Polite, distant, predictable, but he looked at me like there was still something beautiful hidden underneath all these years. Like he could still see the spark that had been buried beneath routines, heartbreaks, and quiet sacrifices. And that gaze, it didn't just make me feel wanted, it made me feel remembered. I'd catch him watching sometimes, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, not in a way that made me question his intent. Just noticing me, the curve of a tired smile, the tiredness itself, the way I'd tug at my sweater sleeves when I was deep in thought. He didn't miss it, not once. There was something unspoken between us. Not because it was forbidden, not because it was impossible, but because neither of us wanted to rush something so delicate. It was enough, for a while, just to be seen. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Years of being needed but not noticed had settled into my bones like cold. I'd carried it without complaint, but when he walked into a room, something warmed, not just the air, not just the silence, but something inside that had long given up on being seen at all. He gave without taking, he stayed without demanding. He listened without trying to fix, and that kind of attention, it undoes you, quietly, completely. One evening, we sat on the back porch. My son had gone upstairs. The sky was that soft kind of dark where the stars begin to whisper, not shout. I was holding a cup, more for comfort than for warmth. He sat beside me, close but not too close, and he didn't speak. He just breathed next to me, in rhythm with a world that had finally paused. Then he looked at me, really looked, eyes soft, steady, not afraid of what he'd find, and in that look I felt everything. Every silent ache, every sleepless night, every forgotten version of myself. He saw them, all of them, and he didn't look away. He never looked away. That was the moment I knew something had shifted. Not just between us, but in me, something cracked open, something fragile and glowing, hidden behind years of being useful but not felt. I didn't speak. He didn't need me to. The love that began wasn't loud. It didn't shout its name. It moved like a tide, sure, slow, undeniable. It touched everything, even the parts of me I thought no one would ever reach again. And somehow, without asking permission, it made me feel like a woman again. Like desire wasn't something I had to leave behind. Like being seen didn't have to come with shame. He noticed what no one else did. And in doing so, he gave me back to myself. It happened by accident. At least that's what I told myself. The kitchen was warm, filled with the soft hum of evening. He had come to help, said he'd bring in the groceries, nothing more. But there he was, leaning against the counter, sleeves pushed to his elbows, hands always moving. There was a kind of energy around him, always had been. Not loud, not chaotic, just alive, always alive. I was reaching for something. A dish towel, maybe. He turned at the same time, not seeing my hand as it moved toward his. And then it happened, that touch, skin to skin, fingertips really, just the edges of our hands brushing in passing. But something stayed. He didn't flinch, didn't pull back right away. Instead, there was this pause. A breath caught between two people standing far too close to pretend it meant nothing. His fingers stayed longer than they should have. That was the first sign. Not long enough to make it obvious, not long enough for anyone watching to raise an eyebrow, but long enough for me to feel the tremble that started somewhere deep inside and spread like warmth to places I had forgotten could still stir. It wasn't lust, not at first. That came later, with the ache, with the wanting. But this was something else. It was like a door had been left slightly ajar in a house I hadn't walked through in years. The kind of door you didn't even know existed until someone else opened it. He didn't say anything, neither did I, but something shifted, the air, the silence, even the way I looked at the shape of his back as he turned away. Everything changed, not in words, not in action, but in the way time slowed around that one small, electric touch. I went about the evening as if nothing had happened, stirred the pot, set the table, picked up after the noise of young men drifting through a home that had forgotten what it meant to be filled with laughter. But my fingers still felt it, that spark, that memory, that impossible, beautiful question he had asked without speaking a single word. Do you feel this too? I didn't have the answer then, or maybe I did, and I was just too afraid to say it out loud. Later, long after the others had gone upstairs, I sat on the edge of the couch with a book in my lap I wasn't really reading. He walked by slowly, heading toward the kitchen again. I didn't look up. I could feel him watching me. That steady, quiet gaze, and then, without warning, he sat down beside me. Not too close, but closer than before. We didn't speak. The room didn't need words. His arm rested along the back of the couch, just behind me. Close enough to sense, close enough to stir that warmth again. When I finally looked up at him, he didn't glance away. His eyes were soft but certain, not demanding, not pressing, just open, and I felt something in my chest tighten, something I hadn't let myself feel in years. He moved slowly. Everything about him was slow that night, like he knew this wasn't a moment to rush. His hand reached out, not bold, not eager, just intentional, and again our fingers met. Only this time he didn't let go. There was a stillness that fell between us, a kind of quiet where you feel the truth press against your skin. His hand was warm, large, young, and yet it held mine with a kind of reverence that made me forget about years and boundaries and reasons. It didn't matter anymore. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. That touch said it all. Said he saw me. Said he knew this moment mattered. Said he felt the same fire, the same ache, the same impossible rightness in something that had every reason to feel wrong. And I didn't move away, because in that moment, nothing about it felt wrong. It felt like coming back to something that had always been waiting. His thumb moved across the top of my hand, gentle, like he was trying to memorize the shape of it. I closed my eyes for a second, not to hide, but to breathe it in, that feeling, that aliveness, that beautiful, overwhelming awareness that I was not invisible, not anymore. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't need to. That touch was enough to break down everything I had built around myself, enough to melt the cold that had settled in my heart for far too long, enough to tell me that something had begun, and it was real. It reminded me I was still alive. It had been building for weeks, quietly, in between glances that lingered too long and silences that said far more than words ever could. It was never rushed. There was no game being played, no pressure pulling us forward, just this slow unfolding, like the petals of something sacred learning how to bloom in the dark. The house was quiet that night. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Soft, steady, the kind of sound that made the world feel slower, heavier, like everything had softened just enough to let something honest through. He stayed later than usual. We didn't plan it. Nothing about that night was planned. It just became. I remember standing by the window, holding a mug I didn't need, watching shadows bend across the walls. He walked in behind me, his steps quiet but certain. I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to. I felt him, the warmth of his presence, the pull of his gaze. It wasn't about fear anymore. It wasn't about rules or reasons. It was just about the moment, about something real that had waited long enough. When I turned to face him, everything else fell away. He stepped forward slowly, as if every inch mattered, as if the space between us wasn't something to cross quickly, but something to honor. His hand lifted, not demanding, not possessive, just an invitation. And I let myself lean into it, let myself fall into the quiet tenderness I had tried so hard to resist. His fingers brushed my cheek like he was afraid I might vanish. His touch was soft, no urgency, no hunger, just reverence. That's the only word for it, reverence, like he was standing before something he didn't think he deserved to hold, but longed to cherish anyway. I didn't say a word, neither did he. There was no need. He leaned in and our foreheads touched before our lips did. That quiet moment of breath shared between us held more emotion than anything I'd felt in years. It was gentle, it was grounding, and when he finally kissed me, it wasn't about passion or fire. It was about presence. It was about being seen, being known, being held without expectation. His arms wrapped around me, slow and certain. I melted into them, not because I was weak, but because I finally felt safe enough to. He didn't pull, he didn't grab, he held steady, patient, strong, and in that stillness I could finally let go of everything I'd carried for far too long. When we moved to the bedroom, it wasn't about a destination. It was about continuing something that had already begun. Each step was quiet. Every movement was intentional, the kind of slow that comes when something truly matters. He undressed me like someone unwrapping something precious, not greedy, not rushed, just full of awe. His eyes didn't roam like he was trying to take everything in at once. They paused, rested, admired, like every part of me was a story worth reading slowly. His hands mapped my skin like it was sacred ground. Gentle, exploring, learning, like he wanted to understand, not conquer. And with every brush of his fingertips, with every soft kiss placed where no one had touched in so long. Something deeper stirred inside me. Something fragile and forgotten. It wasn't about the act. It wasn't about pleasure in the way the world so often reduces it. It was about being held in a way that made my heart ache. The kind of intimacy that wraps itself around your soul, not just your body. The kind that makes you cry without knowing why, because he didn't just touch skin. He touched grief. He touched loneliness. He touched hope that had been buried so deep it hardly remembered how to breathe. He touched the woman in me, not the one shaped by years or motherhood or duty, but the one who still longed to be seen as more than what the world expected, and he saw her completely. He moved slowly, with care, with reverence. He whispered without words, spoke through warmth and breath, and in the quiet of that night, something broke open inside me, a flood of emotion I didn't even know I'd been holding back. Tears welled, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something like release, like healing, like finally being allowed to feel all of it at once. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look away. He held me tighter, kissed my tears like they were proof of something holy. When it was over, though, really, it never felt like something that ended. He didn't turn away. He didn't roll over. He pulled me close and rested his forehead against mine again, just like before. Our breath matched in the dark, slow, steady, full. There was no shame, no fear, just stillness, just truth, just the quiet certainty that I had been touched, not just in body, but in soul, and for the first time in years I felt whole. The morning light poured in quietly, touching the corners of the room with a kind of softness that only comes after something real. There was no rush, no sudden need to get up or explain. Just the warmth of his breath at the back of my neck, the weight of his arms still wrapped around me, and the steady beat of something unspoken between us. It didn't feel wrong, not in the way the world might have expected, not in the way people talk about moments that aren't supposed to happen. There was no panic, no regret, no guilt clawing at the edge of morning, only a quiet peace, a calm so deep it felt like it had been waiting there all along, just beneath the surface, waiting to be found. He hadn't let go through the night. Even when sleep drifted in and softened everything, he stayed close, his hand resting where it mattered, not possessively, but with quiet certainty, the kind of touch that doesn't ask, doesn't claim, just assures. Like his body was trying to tell mine that everything was okay now, that I didn't have to carry the weight of solitude anymore. I laid there in the stillness, watching the soft movements of the curtain in the breeze, feeling his breath rise and fall against my back. And all I could think was how strange it felt to not feel empty, to not feel invisible, to not feel like I had to fold some part of myself away again before the day began. He shifted slightly, pulling me in closer without opening his eyes. As if even in sleep he knew I was still there and wanted me to stay. It said everything, because that touch didn't come from pity. It didn't come from desire alone. It came from recognition. He saw something. Not just a body, not just someone older than him with lines and memories carved into skin. He saw a woman, the woman, and he held her like she mattered, like she was the center of the moment, not a mistake, not a fantasy, not something borrowed or temporary. Real. I didn't realize how rare that was until I felt it. How many years had passed where everything felt like something I had to hold together alone. How many mornings had I woken up with an ache I didn't name, with silence pressed too tightly against my ribs. But now there was nothing to brace for, nothing to explain away, just the quiet comfort of being seen and still being wanted, not for what I gave, not for what I once was, but for who I still am. He opened his eyes eventually, slowly, like waking was a gentle thing and not a tearing apart. He looked at me the same way he had the night before, that calm gaze, full of knowing and warmth and something unshakably true. Not a word was said at first. He brushed a strand of hair away from my face, then ran his fingers down the length of my arm like he was learning me again. Not rushed, not out of habit, just present, and in that moment, I felt more real than I had in years. Not because he made me feel that way, but because he reminded me it was still there, buried, maybe, but not gone. He sat up eventually, stretching in the light. The sheets fell slightly, and he looked over with a half-smile, not the kind boys give when they're proud of what they've done, but the kind a man gives when he knows something beautiful happened and doesn't need to say it out loud. I smiled too, quietly. There was no need to make it bigger than it was. It was already everything. He didn't rush to dress, didn't act like he had somewhere else to be. He stayed, made coffee, sat next to me on the edge of the bed, his knee touching mine. Still that steady presence, still that same weight of intention in everything he did. And when he looked at me again, his eyes didn't drift, they didn't waver, they told the truth without a single word. It wasn't a secret to him, it wasn't something to forget or hide, it was something sacred, and in his gaze I saw that he didn't just accept what had happened, he honored it. He saw me, all of me, every line, every scar, every quiet strength that had carried me through. And instead of turning away, he reached for my hand and held it again, just like he had the first time, slow, certain, honest. I didn't cry, not that morning. The tears had already come and gone in the night, when his hands moved across skin like prayer, and his breath touched places deeper than flesh. But even without tears, there was still emotion, still that overwhelming sense that something old and aching inside me had been brought back to life. He stood to leave eventually, not because he wanted to, but because life calls people back always. He didn't rush, he didn't make promises. He just stood at the door, looked back one more time, and gave me that look again, the one that said everything without needing to explain. And then he was gone, but not in the way that leaves someone emptier, not in the way that makes you question if it was real, because everything about it had been real, the touch, the breath, the way he held me after, like nothing had to be hidden. Like we had done something brave and soft and beautiful, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt whole. If this story stirred something deep inside you, a forgotten longing, a soft ache, a memory you didn't know you missed, don't leave quietly. Tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this with someone who still believes in love that whispers instead of shouts. Because here, we tell stories that don't chase attention, they reveal truth. Thank you for listening, thank you for feeling, and until next time, stay soft where the world tries to harden you, and never forget love doesn't ask permission. It finds you when you're finally ready to be seen.